All right, hello, welcome. You are tuning in to the State of Cardano Q1 2023 Analyst call, and we'll do some introductions to start it off. My name is Sheehan. I'm a research analyst at Messari, specialize on base layers. I wrote this State of Cardano Q1 report, and to steal an intro, I'm tuning in from warm and sunny Colorado, even though it's raining today. Frederik and Charles, you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Okay, I'll start. I'm Charles Hoskinson, the Chief Executive Officer of Input Output.
Yeah, and my name is Frederik Gregaard, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Cardano Foundation.
All right, thanks, guys. So to kick this off, I think we should do a little refresher recap on what Cardano is. We've got the primer of it here in the report, but I think Charles or Frederik, whoever wants to jump on this one, if you want to kind of explain, in your opinion, what separates Cardano from other networks. What's unique about its build or its ethos in that direction.
Well, I can start. And what's so exciting about Cardano is that it's a little bit of everything to everybody because it's such a large decentralized project with so many different community members using it for various things. In 2015, a large group of people came together across the world and decided to explore what building a third generation cryptocurrency would look like, and launched a long arc research project that turned into an actual protocol development project. And Cardano's first iteration launched in 2017. The intent of the project was to explore how do you build something that's sustainable, scalable, and interoperable with not only the cryptocurrency space, but also the traditional financial space, and thus enable a kind of a new financial operating system for the world. So I'm a big believer in real fi, a big believer in banking the unbanked, giving economic agency and identity to those who don't have it. So Cardano to me has always been the enabling function to bridge the unbanked world with the banked world. And it's 3 billion customers in that unbanked world. And unfortunately, their user experience in traditional finance is very predatory, like 85% interest rates with microfinance and 15% remittance rates and all kinds of really bad things. Well, since Cardano's been launched, over 170 research papers have been written, millions of lines of code have been written, 126 projects have launched on Cardano, and now there's kind of Cardano's everything to everyone. So we have a very robust and resilient NFT space with tons of really cool, interesting projects, 7 million assets issued. We have a lot of really cool DeFi applications like MinSwap and WingRider, Sunday Swap, things like Indigo Liquid, an algorithmic stablecoin that Cody just launched this quarter called JED. There's a lot of governance experiments that are occurring on Cardano, and actually Cardano is just about to turn itself into the world's largest DAO with the progress being made with SIP 1694. It's also a really interesting question of how to manage hundreds of millions of assets in a decentralized way. So the Cardano ecosystem is doing that. And it's also a very large scientific project where Cardano is directly funding many labs from Stanford to Carnegie Mellon to labs at the University of Edinburgh and other locations, which are writing peer-reviewed scientific papers that are kind of pushing the state of the art of everything from programming languages to consensus and other topics like algorithmic game theory and law and policy. Cardano is one of the largest proof-of-stake networks in the entire cryptocurrency industry. Until Ethereum actually launched their proof-of-stake, Cardano was actually the largest proof-of-stake network. We are the first to market with a provably secure proof-of-stake protocol. We also have liquid non-custodial staking, which is a big USP over Ethereum and other ecosystems that have a different model. Cardano was first to market with extended UTXO, which is a huge improvement over the Bitcoin UTXO model. Gets all the benefits like local determinism and local state management, these types of things. But then you also get this magic smart contract layer that Bitcoin doesn't have. Cardano has a lot of really cool layer 2 ideas like Hydra, a lot of cool technologies like Mithril. So it's kind of an all-you-can-eat buffet of capabilities, and it's evolving at a very rapid pace. We grew from nothing to millions of people in just a 5-year period. And if you look at the release cadence of community projects, core projects, as well as its ability to compete in the space as a whole, we've always been up there in the top 10. And you said it yourself in your Q1 report, like the 172% increase in TVL, all the really cool, interesting things like Marlo. And we've just recently got our node upgraded to version 8, which actually provides a nice foundation for that largest DAO in the ecosystem to be explored and experimented with SIP 1698, 94, excuse me. And then, keep hard forking. And we actually have these seamless hard forks with the hard fork combinator. So upgrades are actually very easy in the Cardano ecosystem. Back to that interoperability and sustainability component. For me, I've gotten what I needed to actually start working on wiring the developing world into the developed world, and Cardano is the platform of choice to enable that. But I've gone from kind of a project founder to just one of many participants in the ecosystem building cool applications, and it's really cool to see all the other stuff that people are doing, including the Cardano Foundation.
Yeah, thanks for that look into the history. A few of the things you said in the beginning, specifically the sustainability,
Well, hang
scalability.
on. It was a question to both Fred and me. Fred's got to give his side of it.
Yeah, Fred, jump in there too.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of good stuff who's already been said, right? But I think one of the most amazing things you have to always remember that Cardano is not a technology. It's a technology and a social experiment at the same time. And the power of the technology is only as powerful as the people who support it and engage with it. And I think that really sets Cardano aside, because all of these peer-reviewed papers and the technology, you can actually spin up a mini version of Cardano tomorrow, but it won't have the same market cap, it won't have the same breadth, it won't have the same security and so forth. So it's really this part around the community who is engaging and believing in Cardano and the vision together with the technology who makes Cardano special, around actually believing we can change the world. So I think it's really important to really kind of get that straight. Blockchain is not a technology play. It's a human and technology play. And I think that's where Cardano is striking a lot of right notes.
Awesome. Yeah. Again, got us up to speed on a lot of, the ethos of it and where it is today that kind of ties into the direction of, this report on what we were covering. Some of these things are ramping up more now. There are several stages to Cardano. It's also not a finished technology, right? This is something that's evolving, and we're having new iterations, whether that be
art is never done. So you're always working, and and what's so cool is the future roadmaps are actually recursively set by the decentralized governance of the system. So there's stages like Byron and Shelley and Gauguin and Basho and Voltaire, and they were helpful terms that kind of gave people a sense of where the core developers were focusing some of the effort. But by no means is it like, okay, once you finish those eras, then Cardano is a completely finished product. It's a product that meets the needs of the time. And as Fred said, it's defined by the community around it. So as you gain more community members, you gain more requirements, you gain more capabilities, you gain more demands. So eventually people could build nation scale voting systems or ID systems. Eventually people can actually run a whole nation's economy or a securities market or whatever they intend on doing. And when you have that, then you obviously need to build more software. And the power of Cardano is it's very programmable like Ethereum is, but then it also has a great governance play that allows the community to kind of negotiate with itself about where does it want to go over the next 3 to 5 years and self-select those roadmaps. So it's amazing though, because we've made substantial progress in all of those different eras, and we've really achieved some great milestones that are usually first in the industry.
Yeah, I think taking a closer look at this quarter right now, I want to highlight, one of the big things that stood out. We're going to dig through a few of these sections, network and financial, but Charles, you mentioned this one before, the TVL. That was, a huge change we saw this quarter. We also saw the price of ADA take a big jump there, and the total crypto market cap increased. I think it was 46%, but ADA did another additional 10% past that. So in relative terms of what's happening, we saw a lot of growth from ADA, and we saw a lot of growth in the DeFi ecosystem.
Well, the single most important statistic there is that active stake. So there's 24.6 billion in quarter one of 2022, and quarter one of 2023, it's 24.6 billion. So think about that, the level of participation of staking in our ecosystem, where it stayed well above 70%, which means that 7 out of 10 holders are actually participating in the maintenance of the system as a whole. This is just incredible for that to stay the same over a course of an entire year. Usually what happens in the beginning is you get a high level of participation and then things start dropping off. You get a lot of centralization of control. Cardano is actually day by day getting more decentralized and speeding up and also gaining more capabilities. It's unheard of. And this is something that really differentiates where Cardano is going from other ecosystems. When you look at things like input endorsers, for example, which are on the roadmap the next 24, 36 months, input endorsers, when the final version comes in, you'll even have a larger set of people in consensus and you speed the system up. This is brand new protocol design where you get more throughput, but also at the same time more decentralization, not more centralization like the Solanas of the world or the others. And that shows the power of the community. TVL as well, it's 138 in Q1, but compare that to 289 in Q1. Well, the price difference is 38 billion to 13 billion. So real TVL is actually higher, and because there's a very strong DeFi ecosystem that's starting to grow in Cardano, and it's completely community curated. And some of these things are heterogeneous models, like for example, when you look at Wing Riders, it's actually running on an EVM sidechain of Cardano, playing with contracts on the mainnet. So these people independently came up with a way of doing that on the platform and load balancing the two, whereas MinSwap runs mostly on Cardano itself. So there's a lot of fertile creativity inside the market where people are trying and mixing all kinds of interesting technologies or hybridizing technologies, and it's all running concurrently in the system, which is extraordinary. And there's 100%, near 100% uptime since 2017.
Fred, any metrics that stood out to you?
Well, I think yeah, all of them stand out to me, right? Because when you kind of think about it with all the insecurity there is in the market in general right now, and all the talk about enterprise blockchain is dead and all those kind of things, we're actually looking here at the green across the line, and we are looking at that we are sitting in a very rare situation, where it's not the sort of the people who invented Cardano who's pumping out the most innovation, but it's actually the community as large. And what's so special about it is when you look at the operational resilience, which is very unique about Cardano, because in general, when you have a decentralized operating model, what you see is that if you add change into it, it's a huge attack vector. And that's probably one of the reasons why we don't see a lot of upgrades on Bitcoin, right? Because you have a tug of war there. And Cardano is made to change, is made to follow the development, whether that's a regulatory development or an operating model development or nation state development. And those changes not just come from IOG, but it also comes from the community at large. And that means that you have a constant changing system out there who's adapting and adopting different operating models and systems. And I think that makes it a completely different value proposition than the blockchains we have otherwise seen in the first and second generation. And I think getting the governance around that is going to be super challenging, but we are really, really far on that. And I just think it's amazing, to think about the operational resilience of such an advanced system and why it's never down and how it's going so well.
And just to add to that, what's so incredible is every time you ask this community to do something, they show up. And they don't just show up, they show up and exceed expectations. So there was a workshop for SIP 1694, which is what's going to turn Cardano into functionally one of the largest DAOs ever, and allow it to have complete on-chain governance. Well, not only did a lot of people show up, we said, well, we'd like a lot of community workshops around the world to be held. So set up a process for people to submit a request. There were over 100 different requests in different countries across the world. Now, 43 have been isolated as pretty good ones to run. And over the next 60 days, there's going to be more than 40 workshops. The Foundation's hosting one, Emergo's hosting one, and we've already hosted a few, but these are taking place in South America, Africa, Australia, Southeast Asia, and every single one of them is going to generate a tremendous amount of very incredibly good feedback, which then could be aggregated, kind of solidified into a really good test net, and then eventually the community can vote and decide what direction they want to go. The fact that in short notice you can get that level of global participation where people are actually legitimately committed to building a decentralized government is a truly extraordinary feature, and it's something that adds to the durability of this ecosystem. There isn't a single face. It's a collection of people. Then in terms of operational resilience, the other side of it is once you have that functioning structure, because Cardano has been made to be upgraded, it means that we'll be fastest to adopt innovations, or at least the best to adopt innovations, and it's not going to disrupt the core USPs of Cardano, the core principles of Cardano. So effectively, when you look 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, it just keeps speeding up, and the delta between what we offer and what other blockchain systems offer will continue to grow, and there's no single vector of attack. There's no entity, if they were to leave, that the chain would be compromised or unable to compete. It's actually a self-healing system. So I don't know about you, but in a world of geopolitical uncertainty, in a world of 10% interest rates, Argentina 108%, probably banks failing, $548 billion worth of bank failures. It's probably a really good idea to bet on technology that is built to be resilient, self-healing, and completely decentralized and kind of immune to the geopolitics of the day-to-day.
Yeah, this technology is definitely relevant to all of us. And to everyone who's listening, I encourage you to get involved with these community events. You do not need to be some kind of super developer or anything to join in on governance and be part of the community like that. It's it's not too intimidating. So I encourage you to hop in when you see them on Twitter, when you see people sharing news about these. So to move forward on this, I think we're going to look at some more metrics a bit, specific metrics. We'll pop down into network metrics first, and then we're going to look at some qualitative things that are happening, and what we might be seeing in the future, advancements with layer twos like Hydra heads. We'll look at some side chains and other things going on in the ecosystem. But to kick it off, we'll look at the network overview right here. And we see things like the average daily new addresses. While this rate is decreasing, we're still having more people in the Cardano network every quarter. So our total addresses are increasing. That's just a rate decrease.
Well, it increasing during the worst recession the crypto industry's ever had.
Following FTX, following all the chaos.
Yeah, it's hard not to take it personally when you have certain congressmen saying certain things. But this is tough time to be in the cryptocurrency industry. We're no longer the pretty person at the party. We're kind of the people that are pushed off to the corner. But Cardano continues to grow, and actually, it has one of the most loyal fan bases of any cryptocurrency or blockchain ecosystem. And everywhere you go, it's really amazing to see the level of passion and excitement. I really wish we had statistics about how evangelistic people are. So it's one thing to say I'm a ex-fan. It's another thing to say I'm a super fan. And I think we probably win that category. And that's exactly what you need to have durability during periods of economic contraction, because the incentives aren't the same. And really, it starts looking a lot more philosophical than it does economic in terms of people's participation. And so given that we still have a high level of engagement, a high level of community workshops, a high level of community meetups. For example, I didn't have time to attend Consensus this year. And despite that, tons of Cardano fans actually showed up in Austin, Texas, and they held their own events. They did their own things. The NFT side is almost completely community assembled. The CNFT Con last year had 3,000 people attend, 150 exhibitors there, and it was just completely self-assembled. You could pay an ADA to attend, and actually, I think more than 30 or 40% of the people who attended did. So that's a great community to build on. And as you notice in the statistics, it's still growing. From Q1 2022 to Q3 2023, 3.6 million addresses to 4.4 million. And during a really nasty time. Average transaction rates down just a little bit. But what's really cool about that is that's a deceptive metric because people are becoming more efficient at using Plutus V2 and extended UTXO. So if you go to eutxo.org, you can actually see this with a beautiful visualization. Going to Fred's point, it was created by the community, not us. And that's the power of these guys, is that they do this. And you actually can see the blocks, block by block, and each transaction, when you look into it, it's got lots of stuff happening in it. One transaction you'll see will probably have some NFTs being issued and a smart contract being executed and some ADA being moved and a swap or something like that. So those 67,000, if you were to analyze their complexity per transaction to the complexity per transaction of 125,000, they're dramatically higher pound for pound. And that's a huge win for us because that's where the industry is going. You have to be more sustainable. You have to be more efficient. You have to have better utilization of your resources. And in just a year's time, the developers of the Cardano ecosystem have become quite attuned on how to do that.
And that's probably one of the metrics I'm looking a lot at the Cardano Foundation. So we're actually looking at, how many percentage of the transactions are not of what we call a value transaction. That means, moving value from one to one, one to many, many to one, and so forth. So we're looking at the diversity of transactions. And when we look across chains, what we see is that the diversity of transactions are incredibly high on Cardano. And when you kind of compare that, again, coming a little bit back to network and operation resilience, I was just together with a very big regulator. And one of the questions they had to me was actually about endpoint security, network recovery, and so forth. So they actually, even the regulators are looking at right now, how stable are the network, because they're actually projecting a future where more and more core critical infrastructure are run on these decentralized networks. And I think those two things in comparison gives me a lot of hope that not just the architecture, but also the implementation on top of the architecture is going to really change how we operate and how we do business in the future.
Yeah, that's an important thing to note, that these transactions, not really comparable one-to-one with maybe an account-based system. There's a lot more going on with a UTXO transaction. And there are also so many activity measures that like the energy in the community, those things aren't really making it onto these tables. You can't exactly measure those the same way, who's showing up to conferences and how engaged people are. But that's one to mainly note, is that with UTXOs, people always want to compare metrics one-to-one. Not all of them can. A transaction is a very different thing on different networks, even within the same accounting models.
And the other thing which you have to be aware of is that as Hydra is kicking off, we have the first Hydra head live. Hydra is our isomorphic state channels, and basically allows you to create sort of a permission network structure, which basically fits extremely well into certain operating models. And there you will have situations where people are able to do, hundreds and thousands, if not even millions of transactions for very, very low transaction fee, incredible fast, right? Using, different types of, simplified consensus, and then move one net transaction back into the main net. So it would be more complicated over time, actually, to see how these things are actually measuring out. But I do think that, if you're very new to the game, looking at transactions is a good first thing. But as you dig under it, it becomes, more complicated. And I think here, again, one of the very unique things which Cardano has is the transaction finality, right? That we have the ability to actually, have finality and guarantee finality is actually truly unique in the way we look at the architecture. And there's a lot of sort of business models who's right now coming to terms with that. If you have deterministic finality over probabilistic finality, it actually fits better into what we call legal finality as well. And it gives you options for actually being compliant with the current regulations and actually bridging that better into the world we are unfortunately living in today.
Yeah, and Hydra is such an exciting project. It started as kind of a nascent thing, and now the monthly calls, there's well over 40 people who show up. I think there's 8 or 9 companies that are trying to use Hydra to build things, and the very first version of it has reached mainnet. Now, like all open source projects, there's kind of an ebb and flow, but what's really cool is it's radically transparent. It's probably the most effective open source endeavor currently in the Cardano ecosystem. There's many different commits from many different entities. They have a very rapid release cycle that's every few weeks. The entire roadmap is actually in GitHub, and you can see the project plan. And people are looking at it for everything from microtransactions to enhancing DEXs to voting to other concerns. Now, that technology, because of extended UTXO, is very unique to Cardano. Ethereum tried Plasma and state channels way back in the day. That was their pre-rollup scaling solution. And they kind of abandoned it because this concept of having a global state in this account model, it's really hard to guarantee isomorphism in the channel. So the things that happen off-chain can be reconciled on-chain. Too much stuff changes too quickly. But because of UTXO, we actually have a huge advantage in that technology just kind of preserves everything. So Hydra is kind of a secret sauce, and it's a great piece of middleware for dApp developers to pull into their dApp to accelerate something lower cost or add a capability like fast finality or very low cost transaction fees. But that's only one of multiple scaling approaches that Cardano is able to pursue in parallel. And that's what makes it so exciting is you never have to bet the farm on anything. So just accelerating the layer one itself, there's a long arc research stream called Input Endorsers, and there's been an enormous amount of academic progress there where you can truly achieve this parallelizable sharding that basically allows you to have higher levels of decentralization but higher throughput. And it's gone from, hey, it's a good idea to now academic formalism where there's precise mathematical proofs that show how to make it work. But it will take quite a bit of time for that to be reflected into code because it's a very delicate thing that has to be pushed through. But there are two other things that are happening at the same time. There are a lot of conversations right now on how do we leapfrog the rollups side of the world and bring recursive Snark style technology to Cardano. And there's also in parallel a lot of conversations about sidechains where you can have a completely different computational domain that has different rules. Like, for example, Milkomeda has an EVM side. That's a radically different model than extended UTXO. But also Midnight is bringing kind of a private smart contract model, and that's kind of a quasi mode where it's a little UTXO, it's a little account, it does a little bit of everything. So how do you bring those things together? Well, it turns out that they're interconnected to each other. So part of the sidechain strategy of getting a great sidechains kit to Cardano is also about how do you checkpoint the sidechains using rollups on the main chain. So there's actually a huge research initiative right now exploring pasta curves and other cryptographic primitives and asking a fundamental question: how do we get them to a point where they're practical and bring them to Cardano? Then suddenly you're firing on all cylinders. You have this massive open source project that's growing really rapidly that adds this beautiful piece of middleware that makes it a lot easier for dApp developers in their own dApps to be much more efficient in terms of settlement time, transaction volume, and cost. You have long arc research that's being done that organically makes the base network much faster over time. Then you have an adoption of some of these core USPs that other ecosystems like Ethereum are moving to out of necessity because they're so congested, the rollup ecosystem. And then you have the sidechain model, which is going to bring a whole new class of dApps to our ecosystem, which are too big to fit into a conventional smart contract, like the World Mobiles of the world, for example, who are literally building a replacement ISP at nation state level. And obviously that's going to have tens of millions of users and billions of transactions. And they have a safe zone that they can do those types of things in, but that's still connected to Cardano, and Cardano can add a lot of capabilities to that. And then wrap it all together with an identity framework, Atala Prism, which is open for everybody. So where and when you want to start adding regulated components to this, where and when you want to start adding metadata and identity, which is where our industry as a whole is going, that is available to every developer. It's a really compelling future-proofed framework, no matter where regulations go, where your throughput demands go, or what your dApp needs are. You have a menu of options that make that an exciting place to be.
I think in reality, what we're talking about here is taking the blockchain trilemma and turning it into an evolving circle. And I think that's what's truly exciting about Cardano actually being built for change. And that's what you're really seeing when you start looking at the code and how the code is being used at the moment.
Yeah, we're going to jump down to the qualitative section here, which a lot of this stuff, we've just covered in some of what we went into, but to take a deeper look at some of the community stuff that we hadn't really talked about before, there are, a handful of entities, IOG, Cardano Foundation, Input Output Global, that and Emergo that have been supporting from the beginning, but we also have completely community sourced, whether it's side chains, whether it's data analytics tools, whether it's education systems. We have a lot of stake pool operators that are, constantly teaching about Cardano and putting that stuff on Twitter, on YouTube, all over. So I do want to highlight some of the educational resources we see coming out of the community.
Yeah, so actually one of the big problems we've seen is that in the last couple of years, as the world is coming to terms with blockchain, we see that the general education is on first generation and second generation blockchains. And that's completely missing the point, because a third generation blockchain is not about one type of identity, it's not about one type of asset representation, and it's not about one type of governance. What it really is on Cardano is about multiple types of different governance for different situations and different purposes. It's about multiple types of different asset representation, and not just financial assets. It can also be intellectual property right, and it can be multiple things, and multiple types of metadata and governance. And when you kind of start looking at that, what you actually see is that people are learning blockchain in the wrong way. And therefore, we think it's incredibly important that we start actually upgrading the knowledge base for people to actually start understanding of how and what you can deploy in a third generation blockchain. And therefore, for instance, the Cardano Foundation has launched the Alpha program, which we are winding up this week, which is basically taking you from close to zero blockchain knowledge to quite some okay blockchain knowledge. We are now getting the community feedback in now, and then within the year, we have been basically launching sort of an altruistic, free-for-all educational platform, right? Which basically on the first module will give you what's third generation blockchain, and it will also be good for other blockchains in the third generation. And the second part is the Cardano blockchain stack, meaning that you can actually download the blockchain, you can deploy on the blockchain, you understand the different kinds of database synchronization tools, and you can do these things. And all of that are we giving away for free. So we're giving the scripts away for free. So think about if you're teaching at a university, you want to be doing research, and you want to go really deep, and then you'll have to be teaching from time to time as part of having a university job. So the cost of doing those slides is very high compared to what your passion is. Or if you're living in sub-Saharan Africa, right? You're basically getting all the scripts in English, including all the pictures and charts, and you can translate that into your local language using ChatGPT or whatever that might be, right? And you can start upgrading your community, and they start basically being able to find a way to earn money and contribute on Cardano. So they're basically now getting access to the global economy without them actually, needing to travel out of the country. So in this way, I think we're really, unlocking a lot of the power by simply just writing it down. There was somebody once who said, the written word is magic because it replicates everything. It stays there, right? And the idea is to put that into an open source model so the community can self-update that, a bit like Wikipedia, because the development goes so fast. So it's so I think it's a really big kudos to the community who is helping on all these things. But I think we all need to stand together and really start educating about third generation platforms. It truly is important for people to understand what's happening.
And I think when you complete the training, the certificates for that are anchored on the Cardano blockchain.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, having that proper curriculum in universities, which fairly new industry, most universities do not have a proper curriculum for this yet, but the Cardano community is pretty intertwined with academia and a handful of universities, but it's not the only way to do it. Like you were saying, there are a lot of other ways to reach that audience and to educate. And yeah, many of them are coming from IOG or Emergo, or, just a community run, YouTube channel, teaching some of these things, digging into them, some with certifications, some without. And a lot of them are coming from side chains, or where I'm seeing some of that, like Milkamita, I see putting out, some awesome educational stuff. I see them doing a little innovation with UTXO algorithms. That's something we talked about a bit prior to this. We were saying less transactions is sometimes good. Are you building transactions more efficiently? And there are different algorithms to create a simple transaction of just sending some ADA maybe with a UTXO. So we're seeing that innovation coming out of different places. Do we want to dig into Midnight a bit? That is the data protection side chain that IOG is working on.
Yeah, Midnight is just great because it kind of forces some evolution in Cardano. At the same time, it adds a whole layer of capabilities to Cardano, and it also changes the game for SPOs. So one of the things that makes our sidechain model as an ecosystem different from others is that when someone instantiates a sidechain, usually the consensus of Cardano will be involved somewhat in maintaining that sidechain, securing that sidechain. Now, you have to pay for that. So what happens is the sidechain gets infrastructure, security, community, and basically a stable place to be. And in exchange, it pays tokens to the ADA holders via the consensus mechanism. So what will happen is you'll go from 1 to N when you talk about block rewards. And N is the amount of sidechains that you have where your SPO that you've delegated to is participating in maintaining those systems. So a lot of careful work has to be thought about and done. But once that model is figured out, then it makes it very easy for people who have large scale projects, whether it be World Mobile, who's building a sidechain, or Midnight, where that's basically a whole privacy framework for data confidentiality, amongst many other things, to kind of plug into the system. And it's the best of both worlds. Now, if you combine that with Babel fees, as a sidechain operator, what you effectively can do is pay your transaction fees in the underlying asset. Now, under the hood, there's a lot that's going on, and there's still an ADA component, but the average user experience means that they're still staying as if they're a layer one. So you get all the benefits of being a layer one, but you don't have any of the downsides of being a layer one effectively. So I think long-term, this is going to be a very competitive strategy, because there's a lot of bespoke ideas which are too radically divergent from how Cardano is engineered. SingularityNet, for example, is really pushing Hypercycle and Toda, and they say, look, this LLMs thing is huge, ChatGPT and Bard and all these other things. We want to bring that to a blockchain and have decentralized AI, because maybe it's not a good idea that Microsoft and Google and Facebook basically control the most powerful technology the world has ever seen, and maybe we should decentralize that a little bit. Well, that's great, but the back end for something like that is very involved, and it requires a radically different way of processing transactions, storing transactions. It's almost like a hypergraph of neurons. It's a pretty cool thing, and you have to be a guy like Ben Goertzel to conceive of that. Well, Cardano is not going to change its extended UTXO model and its core consensus model and these things to accommodate that. But Ben doesn't want to go to the trouble of trying to figure out how to build a great layer one. It's an enormous effort. We spent 7 years trying to do that in Cardano. So that's a great example of where it makes sense to have custom logic, custom ledger rules, custom transaction, but anchor your security in something that already has a great network effect. It's listed on more than 200 exchanges, and has a huge, active, vibrant community. So Midnight is really going to be one of those standards bearers that kind of cleans up the experience of how one communicates with a sidechain, how smart contracts communicate with each other, sorts out the pub sub conversation, sorts out the security conversation, but also it brings some new innovations to the space that no other sidechain model has. So one of the core technologies that's coming into Cardano sidechain kit is this idea of Minotaur. And Minotaur is really fourth generation cryptocurrency technology. It's multi-resource consensus. So usually consensus stems around a resource. Proof of work, it's hash power. Proof of stake, it's how much of the asset you have is your synthetic resource. And you pick one. So people get into these fights of proof of storage versus proof of stake versus proof of proof of X, proof of space time or whatever. Well, what if you could run multiple consensus algorithms at the same time? Proof of work with proof of stake, proof of storage with proof of work and proof of stake. So Minotaur is a paper we published last year working with some great scientists from University of Illinois. And basically it contains a framework for not only how to do that, but how to dynamically weight it. So over time, you can change from like 70%, 30% to 20-80 or 50-50, however you want to do that as a governance action. So what's cool about Midnight is that not only can we borrow security from Cardano, we can add other consensus layers, like, for example, proof of useful work, which is another paper we examined, for proof acceleration for rollups. So you can have dedicated hardware to make the system thousands of times faster than competitors like the Matter Labs or others, but that can run in parallel with Cardano's consensus algorithm and have a different incentive model. No other chain has really looked into the future, and we're probably years ahead in terms of foundational research on how to do these things. And Midnight's going to be the first party to kind of bring this to the fray. But that also means that every sidechain in the Cardano ecosystem will have that framework available, and they'll be able to use that framework for their particular logic. For example, when you look at World Mobile, they have aerostats, and that's hardware. So maybe they want to include some sort of consensus mechanism that's connected to the aerostats that are deployed and involve that in the maintenance of the system transaction processing, in addition to using the stake pool operators of Cardano. That's now something that they can think about and engineer. With Hypercycle and Toda for SingularityNet, they're probably also going to need some sort of hardware acceleration layer to be able to process a decentralized large language model. Google has billions of dollars of tensor processing units. If you look at OpenAI, they have these custom NVIDIA cards, the H100s, and they have massive racks of them, hundreds of millions of dollars of them. Well, if you actually look at the totality of Bitcoin mining, there's more ASICs there than there's AI processing units floating around. So if you could incentivize people to mine in that direction, then suddenly you have useful work. And this is something that Minotaur is going to bring, and it's very unique to the Cardano ecosystem. And as these things come in, it creates network value for Cardano, more transactions in Cardano, more interchain communications, and then ultimately bespoke chains for different domains, regulated and unregulated.
Yeah, I want to highlight that again, this security model is not just something for midnight. I mean, you can buy many things, you cannot buy decentralization, which is a
Right.
dimension of security. And if you're able to borrow it from, something that's built grassroots and it's 5 years running with that level of, low hardware requirements to have a lot of stake pools and have a lot of people contributing to that decentralization, that's something you cannot buy as someone trying to start up a new chain, solve a new use case. So
Yeah.
very excited to see, it seems Midnight will be the first implementation of this, but what other uses people want to use it for, and what other ideas it opens up. Into a bit of the development advances, Doug, if we want to scroll down to development there were some big on-chain, there were some big updates to the Cardano core protocol. So, we're seeing some stuff that's being built outside, like our side chains and our Mithril and our Light client stuff. But to the core protocol itself, we've had some changes that are helping developers. We've also had some new programming languages being tested out, being used for, some of their first applications. One kind of broadening who this is available to off the bat, what languages you know how to write in if you're a dev. But there are also different optimizations. We have different programming languages for a reason. Some of them are better suited to building different types of things. So Fred or Charles, any thoughts you have on, Aiken, Marlo, some of the new dev tools we have coming out?
Well, Marlo is the first major DSL to hit the network that's end-to-end. It's been 4 years in development, and it was kind of hell because we had to figure out how to build DSLs in this kind of model. But now that we have the template for it, it's actually a lot easier to deploy DSLs. And the point of Marlo was, if you look at a lot of these complex financial contracts, they tend to do the same things again and again and again. And if you're just writing all that in a general purpose programming language, you end up making a lot of mistakes. And those mistakes translate to hacks, like the parity multi-sig hack or these types of things. And even the best amongst us can do that because it's complicated code. So if you have a Turing incomplete DSL that's quite limited but very effective for its scope, then what you could do is say we can go to a much lower complexity code and get formal proofs of correctness of that code for all execution paths because it's Turing incomplete. So that translates to ultimately smaller code bases. So instead of lots of Plutus code, you have a little bit of Marlo code and a little bit of Plutus code, and it's effective for both. And we've seen this in the database world. Like, go ahead and try to hand program a relational database management system and interact with it with Java or something. It's really hard. But if you use SQL, it's super easy because it's kind of pre-built around that CRUD model, and you kind of have a notion of how to layer schemas with that. So Marlo is an example, but by no means is it the only entry point. What's going to happen is there's going to be other DSLs that enter the ecosystem now that that template is there, like a legal DSL or DSLs for other domains, maybe issuing NFTs or these types of things. And they've really simplified the entire programming process. And in fact, the foundation is doing some really cool work with Aiken. I'll turn it over to Fred just to kind of talk about some of the things that they're working on there.
Yeah, sure. So Aiken is a modern smart contracting language which is written in Rust and is under an Apache 2.0 license. So what we're really trying to do here is we're trying to do two things. We're trying to sort of breadthen the scope of what you can actually do in terms of expressing yourself with different languages, but we're also really trying to push the open source model. So we have more than 30 contributors from the Cardano community already into Aiken. It is true that there is a few core contributors, but we're already having, an open roadmap. We have an open contribution process with clear guidelines and so forth. So I think, it just really just shows, what's really possible. and that you're not just locked into one programming language, which has a lot of flaws, but you can basically think about what industry are you in, what background are you in, what kind of audits do you need, and so forth, and then you can express yourself. I think that's one of the really cool thing which is basically happening here. The other part which I'm being asked a lot about is, what about this Haskell? Cardano is so hard because it's Haskell based. And I was just in London here this week, where I had the opportunity to speak at the Financial Times Digital Asset Summit together with a nation state leader and some other interesting stuff. And I met up with the Oxford University. And you know what they teach in the first year in the Oxford University, if you know anything about computer science, math, or blockchain? Well, they teach Haskell, right? And the COO of the Cardano Foundations, his daughter is at the university in Zurich, and she's studying Haskell, right? So it seems like to me that you're having two worlds, which is sort of diverting. You have the old Ethereum world, which is sort of very expressed in Solidity, and then you see the incumbent world of large businesses and universities who's getting closer and closer to what we love and what we cherish every single day. So I think what you're going to see is you're not just going to see a boom of different languages and different ways to solve mathematical and engineering problems in Cardano, but you're also going to see a lot more developers coming in with years and years of Haskell experience. Even though Haskell is not such a big language, it certainly is developing very fast and has a lot of advantages.
Yeah, and just to add to that, what's really cool about Cardano is that as we go to a multi-chain model with all these side chains, and we go to a model with DSLs as well as different compile targets like Aiken, where you have more of a Rustish syntax, and others are trying to do JavaScript. There's a TypeScript variant. I think it's Plutus or something like that, and option is, I think, choosing a Python style syntax. Is that what ends up happening is that through developer adoption, these community standards start growing. The treasury system allows them to kind of grow like weeds, and then they end up becoming first-class citizens. Like if you look at the Java ecosystem, Java is the least interesting part of the Java ecosystem. You have Kotlin and Scala and Clojure and Julia and all the other languages that exist in that. And the JVM kind of organizes it, keeps them performant, and gives them some base capabilities. But each of these ecosystems are different tools for different types of developers. So if you're building massive, large-scale concurrent systems like Twitter, or Netflix, Scala is an ideal tool. If you're doing scientific computing, Julia is a great tool for that. If you're doing app development, Kotlin is a great tool, but they all go to the same place, the JVM. So the Cardano ecosystem is starting to develop in that particular direction. The other thing is you can't ignore AI's effect on development. So if you look at Google Bard and you look at Copilot and other technologies that are entering market, over the next 24 to 36 months, these large language models will become so good at programming that they will go from pretty good beginner programmers, not so good intermediate, terrible advanced, to exceptional beginner, exceptional medium, pretty good advanced. And they're polyglots. So you can say, rewrite this program from Python into Haskell and optimize it and put an Elm front end. And it'll actually do that for the most part, up to about 90, 95% of what you need. So if we're moving into a world where you have an AI co-driver, a co-pilot that's kind of helping you build your application, in the next 5 or 10 years, it's less about the language and it's more about the intent. It's more about the protocol design. It's more about your customer base and these types of things. And your velocity, your ability to QA these things, your ability to deploy these things is going to go up tremendously regardless of the particular dev tooling that's there. So I think we're very well suited to handle those types of things because there's some great design decisions in Cardano, like local determinism and the broader extended UTXO model and other things like that basically just make it a lot easier for automated tools to understand, predict behavior. Non-determinism is the bane of AI because it's really hard for it to reason about all the different edge cases and the things that could go wrong and prioritize them. When you have determinism, you can kind of just reason really quickly and say, okay, these are the things you want to do and how you want to do that. So I think we're actually best suited for a polyglot ecosystem, both off-chain and on-chain. I think we're really well suited for a strong DSL game, which is going to really simplify the developer experience and increase developer velocity. And I think we're actually really well suited to be a leader in the AI movement where that comes. And for AI generated code to run effectively in our system. So I think we're doing real well there. It's absolutely true. Also, Haskell tends to be taught at a lot of elite institutions. They teach it in entry courses at MIT, University of Edinburgh, Oxford, as Fred mentioned. So your really good developers, they tend to grow up with those functional first tools because that's much more pure and aligned with the mathematic rigor that these elite programs have. And so that means those programmers tend to gravitate towards the systems that have them. And that means we actually have a lead in the high assurance world and in the high level of formalism world. Where is that relevant? Fortune 500, GovTech, these other places. In fact, I just had a meeting with the U.S. Cybersecurity Group, part of the White House, and one of the scientific advisors really loved talking to us because she's a huge fan of memory safe languages, a huge fan of formal methods, a huge fan of rigorous things. And she's thinking from a cybersecurity perspective. And she says, well, look, we have these really vicious adversaries like China and Russia, and in any flaw in our code, they're going to exploit. So it's not about necessarily first to market or fastest development velocity. It's about writing it the correct way, even if it takes a little longer and more effort. So really in market, there's only a few systems that actually have the level of formalism we have. I mean, there are certainly the Tezoses and others, but by far we're the largest player in that market. So when you talk about high value clients that have hundreds of millions or billions of customers, what we've developed in that center vertical, the Haskell Plutus side, is really the most appealing to them. And they're great conversations to have.
Yeah, and maybe just another sort of remark which sparked me when I was following the chat, which I don't know if everybody's aware of. But, with the 8.0 node, which was just released, we actually did a small update to the command line interface, which actually allows the stake pool operators to vote or do a poll, more specifically, on chain using a verified credential or digital identifier. So the certificate they're actually using to identify and publish on the blockchain as identifier. And by that, we actually have the ability to get 3,000 plus stake pools to actually go in and start giving an indication about where they see that the perfect optimum is for the protocol parameters. So for the first poll we're doing, we are actually going to talk mainly about the K parameter and the min pool fee. And why is this important in terms of what Charles is saying? Well, this is really important is because the stake pool operators are really the people who run the network, right? And by doing a delay in the voting, meaning that the stake pool operators cast their vote, then the ADA holders will have the opportunity to basically say, oh, hold on a second, the stake pool operator I was delegating to is having a different view than I have, which means that they actually are able to, take away some ADA and put that to another stake pool, or they're able to say, oh, this is actually really cool, and they can actually, double up on the ADA there. So we're actually then having the ability to tune the network based on what the stake pool operator starts seeing. And in this way, we're sort of decentralizing decision-making to optimize the network. And then we then start sparkling that with some DREPs and work like the University of Zurich is doing around, centralization and decentralization, around different incentives and game theory. What we're actually getting is we're getting sort of a social system with decentralized governance, even before or in the process of actually getting the final tools out there. So I think, this is quite unique with Cardano, not just the voting, but the ability for us to do these sort of protocol adjustments on the fly without an actual hard fork. And this is things I think people don't really appreciate, but what that really does is it enables large operating models and allows a lot of change to happen and us to really tune the network as we go along.
Yeah, we've definitely improved visibility for delegators with that new update, and that's another step on the path of Voltaire, which is one of those 5 concurrent tracks that are expanding Cardano in a few different directions, one being governance. So if you're in the chat, we're going to take some questions. Feel free to add some in. We're going to field as many as we can before we hop into the end of this. But yeah, please jump in if you got something good you want to ask someone here. Fred, we do have one question that I think I'm going to send your way.
Sure, go ahead.
Asked, when on-chain certificates for the alpha program?
So we're We actually that's a really good question. I actually think they're going to be bulk updated, to be honest. But the alpha program, as I told, is really a sneak peek to ensure that we get the community's sort of, I wouldn't say acceptance, but the feedback on how we actually designed it. And the idea is that we are closing that down on Sunday. And then we're basically, looking at all the feedback we've gotten from the first 500 something users who were sort of signed up. Not everybody managed to complete it. Some people had, maybe they knew it already or they had a lot of time. And then we're going to roll it back one notch, and then we're going to finalize what we call Module 1. And that's then going to be published as a certificate on Cardano, like what we do with the Zurich University on the blockchain school, where all the students actually, not only to graduate, need to do something physically on the blockchain, but they actually get a certificate, which is co-signed by University of Zurich. So we're basically using a verified credential from the University of Zurich to basically verify and validate that the certificate is actually real and made. So you can actually verify their server as well. And then at the end of the year, we'll get the Module 2. And again, we're going to use the same kind of technology around that and get a certificate on the mainnet. And here the hope is really, and I'm not sure we can make that, but the hope is really we can get to a situation that we can have 1 or 2 universities co-signing those certificates, so we can actually start spreading the love through that world. And the people who actually need it, they can get ECTS points for it, or the corporate people who is locked in an 8 to 4 corporate job that needs to sometimes justify why they're learning something about the future, which is actually going to change the future, that they can actually verify to the HR departments that what they did is amazing. So it's a little bit the old centralized world we're going down to. We're just using decentralized metrics, and then we're using the ability for having your third-party verifiers and so forth.
Awesome. Thanks for that rundown, Fred. Charles, I got a question for you now. It's about mobile development. Where do you see the state of that? Do we see a timeline around that? Do we see any technologies we talked about today that are contributing towards that?
So the way I suspect the mobile development is in reference to the Lace wallet. And so the way that we designed the Lace wallet, the code base is wrapped in React, and React Native allows you to have a very nice port to the mobile world and to the desktop world. So what's happening is we're on a monthly release cadence. We just released version 1.1. 1.2 is scheduled for release June 13th. And so the hope is every Tuesday, second Tuesday of the month, we can push something out. There's going to be a few iterations to just kind of build a corpus of features that would have been nice to have at launch, but were clipped to just get a secure product out. Then once we're past that, then you can go, there's 2 directions, multi-chain and multi-client. So the multi-client direction, we're kind of waiting for Mithril to mature before we aggressively push that. Mithril, I'd say around the June, July time period, will be at a certain level of maturity where that now is not a barrier to integration into both the mobile client and the desktop client. And they have different goals. So on the mobile side, it's just a security enhancement where you get light node experience with full node security. And then in terms of the desktop side with Mithril, it's about fast sync. So average Daedalus node takes more than a day to sync. Seems like it's shitty, but I mean, that's the experience of syncing a full Explorer node of Ethereum or Bitcoin. In fact, it takes a lot longer for those guys because they've been around longer. And they have a lot more on-chain state to worry about. Whereas Mithril allow parallel validation of epochs. So if you're multi-core, you can go very, very fast on those things. So React is a single code base. You then can do multi-deployment. They'll obviously have different features. For example, with mobile, certain features may have to be removed in order to get approval from the iOS store and the Google Play Store. And it's not our choice. It's just, the EULA with these things. For example, it's difficult to have NFT marketplaces and these types of capabilities. But what's really cool is everything we do, we always try to do it in a way where it creates a blueprint for the rest of the community to use. For example, the construction of Lace really forced the formalization of CIP30 to an extent that we have one standard as opposed to opinions of a standard. It's going to be the same for dApp certification. It's going to be the same for Mithril integration. Once we do it, there's a blueprint, and then it's going to be very easy for other community wallets, of which there's almost 20, to go down that road and gain those capabilities, and it just becomes a feature we all come to know and love. The other side is also multi-chain support. So there's first the sidechain ecosystem, for example, making sure that there's midnight support for Lace, but then also other ecosystems. It is our intent to add to Lace support for chains like Algorand and Solana and these types of things. But that's a different architecture, and it takes a little bit more time to kind of push through. Now, in the mobile space, there's certain things that I've always wanted to have in the Cardano ecosystem. Like, for example, I'm a big fan of Copay, BitPay, that wallet in the Bitcoin space, and I used it extensively in the early days. It would be really nice to have a similar multi-sig experience there. Also, I really would like to have a paper wallet generator and other things that is, using PGP and other technologies to protect against printer attacks, printer replay attacks. So, these are just some of the cool things that now that we're on that monthly release cadence, we can build our way very rapidly to. And it's using basically state-of-the-art web technologies, which are really fast moving. So Lace is a very different product from products like Daedalus or Cardano Core, where things are very slow, methodical, and deliberate. Lace is much more akin to what you'd see with a web application or a mobile application, where you have rapid iteration, rapid relaunches, small response times. It just took quite a bit of infrastructure building to get Lace to a point where it could be safe to release. But now that that infrastructure is in play, it's really cool to see how quickly we can move with it.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what we can do with light wallets in the near future. And you heard it there. There's a lot of mobile tooling missing, so keep that in mind at the next hackathon you go to. We are at about an hour here, so I want to say thank you everyone so much for coming. Fred and Charles, do you guys want to give a last word to the audience here before we jump out?
Yeah, I think there was just one question left, which I really have a strong view on, right? And that's for blockchain to really scale and really go on to a lot of the magical use cases everybody's been speaking about the next 5 years. What you really need is verifiable credentials and DIDs. And what is beautiful is that Cardano is built for that, right? So you can already do that on Cardano. It's not a problem. But obviously with the Tala Prism 1.0 and the Tala Prism 2.0, which Charles was mentioning before, it would be a lot easier. And actually the foundation is also coming out with a solution for, a low-key solution for verifiable credentials and DIDs, which you are able to use. So, and there's a couple of community projects already. So actually you can already do it on Web3, to give a Web3 experience, but it's just going to be a lot easier with some tooling and some more things coming out about it.
So it's all about freedom. It's all about choose your own adventure, and it's all about community. There was a question that was, what's the call to action for the community over the next 6 months? We got to get something like SIP 1694 over the fence and get the community fully engaged in the day-to-day governance of the system. And once you do that, we've unlocked a resource and a gift that keeps on giving. And everybody plays a part, whether it's hosting a workshop, whether it's posting intelligent conversations in the forums, holding community groups, whatever it might be. There's an enormous spectrum of ways people can participate in that, but the unlocking of that governance is going to get us to the next level. And then once we're there, we can do some really fun things that no other ecosystem in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space is going to be capable of. And that's what's going to keep us around decade by decade by decade. The rest of this stuff, it's a fun technological endeavor, and there's a lot of amazing science and engineering that goes into it, and a huge amount of work to get us there. But it gets commoditized over time. GPT was this incredible advancement. Now we have Bard, and everybody's waiting for when GPT-5. It's like 3 months ago we couldn't believe it. It was magic, and now it's like, that's around there, that's there. So technology has a way of doing that. Whereas community, it is the thing that's more important. And any time you can find a way to get the community more engaged, more resilient, more diverse, and also contributing more intellect to the system, the stronger the overall organism is. And I'd say that that's the thing that's really going to set us apart in the next few years as we continue to grow. There's no shortage of brilliant ideas, but that's the thing we all need to contribute to. And every indication is we're exceeding the expectations by leaps and bounds.
Future's looking bright. All right. Thank you again, both of you, for joining. Thank you for everyone who tuned in to watch. If you want to stay updated on this, we'll be putting out a Q2 report with, some of the exciting new stuff that's been happening recently, and, we'll see over the next month or two. So see you all on the next one. Thanks everyone again for tuning in. Bye.
Cheers.